So let's finish off talking about sales process, and as part of that, let's talk about something which we call the sales approach. So let's first of all talk about the word process. Process is a way of thinking about repeatable steps to make something that otherwise can be very complicated a little bit more simple to address. And the world of selling has really focused over the last decade or so on this concept of the sales process, of having best practice, repeatable methodologies or sales process. And I just want to cover some of the highlights in terms of what we are now seeing happening with effective sales organizations and effective salespeople. Think about your job as a salesperson. In many cases, what you might have is a job which has to involve a little bit of farming and a little bit of hunting. So one of the first things that you might have to do is to think about how much time, think about this thing called effort priorities, how much time do you have to spend on each of these? If you just spend time on established customers, you might not grow the base enough. You lose one of those customers, you have nothing to replace it with. If you spend all your time on new business, all your time out hunting, then the existing customers might feel a little bit aggrieved, and they may begin to move away, and that's a very, very expensive loss. And so one of the first things to do from a best practice science perspective is to set your priorities, is to get the balance right for how much time you're spending on new and how much time you're spending on your established customer base. And of course, there's no silver bullet answer to this. This is going to be a different number for every salesperson with a different territory, with a different part of the market that they have responsibility for. But that's key step number one, is to determine where it is that you're going to spend your time. All right, once you've done that, then you have to say within that, where am I going to really focus, this notion of the target customer, and then to even go down a level and say who within the different accounts, who within the different marketplaces, from a people perspective, from a decision-making perspective, who is going to be important to me in terms of relationship development that will lead to successful selling. So I'm now focusing, and I guess the key point here is to think that focus equals defocus. The only way you're going to be successful if you focus is to not focus, is to take your eye off some other parts of the business. And that's very hard to do. But the reality is that not every prospect, not every customer, not every single account, existing account, is worth the same to you. So you have to determine where you're going to spend the most valuable asset that you have, which is your time. Then you're into the next level of the plan, if you think of this as a plan, which is I now need to think about how I'm going to do my sales calls and how I'm going to represent my organization. And representing from a presentation perspective could be either about my capabilities, if they don't know me, or about a specific solution, if I've been working with them on a need and I'm now in to present and recommend a specific solution. And this is where we're beginning to see, again, a split into three different types of presentation that salespeople are doing. And the three different types you can see are the prepared presentation, the consultative presentation, and then something called the selling formula approach. Let's just talk very briefly about these. The prepared approach is where what you have is your salespeople effectively execute a script. You tell them how you want them to talk about your company. You tell them almost from a dictated textual perspective what you want to say about your products, and then you know that everybody that's out there representing your organization is using the same words to describe the company and to describe the solution. That's what I mean by prepared approach. Consultative approach is the exact opposite, where effectively the salespeople go in with a blank piece of paper. And in terms of being consultative, their job is to understand the needs of that individual customer, and then what they say about their capabilities is tied extensively and specifically to those needs. So there is no prepared approach. What they do is represent the company in terms of what they're hearing from the customer. And then the third, the selling formula approach, is a little bit between the two. And what you think about selling formula, imagine that what you have is not a blank piece of paper, but you have a piece of paper with titles. And so you know that when you're presenting on your company's capabilities, for example, there are certain things that you have to cover, but the detail is going to be based on the consultative conversation that you've had with the customer. So it tells you what are the key pieces, what are like the headings that you should cover, but the detail, the words themselves, are left to the salesperson based on what they're hearing from the customer. Now, if you think about these three different approaches, and you've probably been on the receiving end of all three, there are again pros and cons to each. The prepared approach, frankly, is dying, especially in the world of more complicated sales. I think we all know when we're being fed a script. I think we all know when we're just hearing standard language. It doesn't feel very personal. It doesn't feel very customized. In fact, it doesn't feel very client-centric. And the prepared approach really is adding very little value to the buyer. It might work for a very simple product. It really doesn't work for a complicated product or something like a soft solution. But the advantage of the prepared approach is you can get your salespeople, especially new people who join you, you can get them up to speed really, really quickly, because all you have to say to them is go do this, read this, learn this. So the prepared approach, I guess, is a historical way of performing, and really is not adding a whole lot of value in the world today. The consultative approach probably adds the most value to the customer because it is based on them, it is based on their needs. But the fundamental problem with the consultative approach is how long it takes to get a new salesperson to be truly consultative. I mean, how long do you think it takes to take somebody who comes into your organization to get them to the point where they know enough about your offerings, they know enough about how to ask questions, they know enough about analysis and synthesis to interpret what comes from the customer and then offer a very collated and value-added conversation to the client? And the answer is it takes a long time. The average ramp-up time for a salesperson in the consultative world today, and this is average, so people take longer than this, but the average ramp-up time is 9 to 10 months. In fact, you're almost paying them for a year's performance, and they're not performing. And so the problem with the consultative approach is how you get people up to speed quickly. So the selling formula aims to get the best of both worlds and lose the bad bits of both. So the selling formula is really the way I think a lot of consulting companies operate. I think some of you are probably going to be working for consultants when you leave here. And when you go and work for them, what you'll discover is that you'll be doing templatized consulting. There'll be some things, 80% of the situations are going to be the same, and it's the 20% that is different from client to client. So that's really the same in terms of selling. But what if the 80% of it is laid out, but it's the 20% that you're able to configure and customize for that specific customer's organization? And so we are seeing increasingly the use of selling formula. Again, a thread I hope you're beginning to realize is there's a lot of science being added to this world of selling over the last decade or so. And so you make your sales presentation, and as a result of that, you then are trying to create interest, you're trying to overcome the problem, any objections that people have, to arouse desire. I'm sure that you remember AIDA from your previous work in the core. And then, of course, the last piece is this thing called closing the sale. And I want to finish off on this thing called closing the sale. I think that 5-letter word, close, has put more people off selling than just about anything else. People think that bad things around this world closing the sale. And certainly if you watch the film Glengarry Glen Ross, then you are quite right to believe that closing is a nasty, manipulative, psychological trick mechanism to get somebody to do something that really they shouldn't be doing.
A, B, C. A, always B, B, C, closing. Always be closing. Always be closing.
Well, let me tell you, in the current millennium, then those techniques really do not work, or in very few circumstances do they work. Maybe in a car showroom with people that are naive buyers. But in the majority case, the old-fashioned way of psychological manipulation is not the way to get people to buy. In fact, the modern technique for close is very collaborative, is very consultative, is very informal, very non-manipulative, and actually is very, very easy. If you do your job well enough up until this point, if you really understand the customer's needs and you identify what it is that you do and what your capabilities are, if you do that job well enough, then the customer will want to buy. So you can think of selling in the modern era is less about push and more about pull. It's less about this active thing called selling and more about enabling people to buy. And I really think that that's where the most effective salespeople are. And of course, after you close the sale, then there's a follow-up, whether that's to do with relationship development or actually executing on the sale. So hopefully this has helped add some value to the chapter. I hope that a couple of examples I've given you have been helpful in bringing some of it to life, and I just wanted to finish on some key takeaways. I think personal selling is very, very important. It's a very expensive part of many organizational expenditures, and in many cases it's the only link to the customer. The second point here is that selling isn't selling. There are very different types of selling. In fact, I did some research once and we identified at least 29 different flavors of selling, but they really all boil down into these three. There's the order getters or hunters, there are the order takers or farmers, and then there are these other people who don't even look like salespeople, supporting salespeople, and they are fundamental to the sales effect. And then of course the third piece we talked about, sales is a job where you never stop training. I guess it's like a sport. You're always practicing, you're always having to develop your skills. Compensating salespeople in the right way drives the right behavior, and if they do the right things, then the company will be successful. So I hope this has been helpful, and will help you move forwards in making good career decisions. I'm not here to sell you on the notion of becoming a salesman. All I can tell you is that there is this role called professional selling. It can be very enjoyable, and organizations are desperate to find people who can do this thing called consultative selling. The biggest gap in the market at the moment is finding people who understand business and can build a relationship with the client to talk about their business and then talk about the offering, not the other way around. And it's a real issue for many companies at the moment. So I wish you well with the rest of your degree and with your career. So thanks so much.